Got that Spanish down now. Let's go to Gaza again. Obviously, the word again is important in that phrase. Why? Well, let me show you some of the things that have been going on there now. It's one of those places in the world where the expectation of war is never too far away, unfortunately. And tonight, it's happened again. For months, there have been talks with some hope of calming the situation on the Israeli-Gaza border that you see behind me. Palestinians have been protesting there, saying, well, they live like occupied citizens. Israel has reportedly responded somewhat harshly, killing more than 170 unarmed Palestinians. That's going back 3-4 months now. Sadly, and almost as if on cue, the Palestinians fired back. More than 300 rockets and mortar shells fired into Israel today. The response from Israel, of course, fighter jets, attack helicopters, even tanks. Here now is RT America's Dan Cohen with the latest.
This is the moment Israeli airstrikes destroyed the building belonging to Al-Aqsa TV. It's one of 6 entire buildings Israel leveled in the last 24 hours. Here's how we got to this point. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, had said in recent weeks they want to avoid an escalation. They had nearly agreed to a long-term ceasefire. Hamas would end the demonstrations at the fence, in which Israeli soldiers have killed more than 150 people over the last 6 months, and Netanyahu had agreed to allow Qatar to transfer tens of millions in cash to keep Gaza afloat. Despite the ceasefire, Israel launched a military operation inside Gaza that ended up with 7 Palestinians and 1 Israeli soldier killed. In response, the armed factions in Gaza launched hundreds of rockets. The Israelis say around 60 of them were intercepted. Israel, with its huge military advantage, continued attacking from the air. They say it's in response to the rockets from Palestinians. Israeli airstrikes killed 3 Palestinians on Monday afternoon, and resistance fighters continued to launch rockets. Earlier Monday, they targeted a bus full of Israeli soldiers with an anti-tank rocket. But instead of hitting it while all the soldiers were inside, they waited until just 1 soldier was on board. Al-Aqsa TV was minutes away from publishing the video when Israel bombed the station.
It was very obvious that the Palestinian factions don't want to escalate, but this is a very intelligent message from the Palestinian factions that they're watching everything, they can see everything, but at the same time they're not willing to escalate.
Palestinian armed factions released a statement calling for a wider military response. The Israeli Security Cabinet, for its part, met Monday afternoon to discuss whether to expand the assault or not. Benjamin Netanyahu has been under pressure from the right for allowing funds into Gaza, so that could explain the attack. But it's unclear what a wider assault would aim to achieve. The Israeli government body that administers the occupation wrote a threat on Twitter saying if Palestinians continue to launch rockets, they should expect something like Operation Protective Edge. That was back in 2014 when Israel killed 2,200 Palestinians, most of them civilians. The English version of the threat was deleted, but it remains in Arabic. For now, Israel is reinforcing its troops around Gaza, while Egypt attempts to mediate between the two. In Washington, Dan Cohen, RT.
You know what's interesting about these battles, good report by the way, it always seems like it's not just a battle on the ground, but it's also a propaganda war. Who's winning this propaganda war at this point, Dan?
Well, in this case, there's really no debate that Israel violated the ceasefire. So, But then hold on a minute. Aren't we hearing that it was the Palestinians who lobbed over 300 mortar shells? Right, exactly. That's what we'll hear in mainstream media over in, this side of the ocean, that it's always the Palestinians breaking the ceasefire. But in this case, it was very clearly Israel. It launched a raid about 48 hours ago as they were discussing a long-term ceasefire, and it's not really clear why.
So the Palestinians, hearing word of this Trojan situation, if I can call it that, coming into their midst, decided that they would preempt the attack, and that's why they fired the mortars?
Well, basically, once the Israeli operation its cover was blown inside Gaza, about 3 kilometers in,
right,
then Palestinians caught these Israeli soldiers. Then the Israelis start launching airstrikes, drone strikes, everything to provide cover for the Israelis
to get them out.
Escape. Exactly. And so that's when Palestinians started launching rockets back. So it's very predictable.
So it's a lot. There's my goodness, that's interesting. So there's really a lot more to it than the report we received this morning in both, AP, New York Times, traditional news sources, essentially the wires, I should say, saying that this started when the Palestinians lobbed the 300 mortars. You're saying, and I want to just hold you to this. You're saying that's really not the case. It's a lot more complicated than that.
Even Netanyahu was just in Paris saying, we need a long-term ceasefire and talking about why it's important. And he came back because the military violated the ceasefire. So what the logic is, I don't know, but those are the facts.
Dan Cohen, as usual, on top of these stories for us. We thank you, Dan. Good reports.